Welcome, dear listener, to another journey through time with sleepless survivors. Tonight we invite you to drift into peaceful slumber as we explore the dawn of human civilization itself. Close your eyes, settle into comfort, and let us transport you back over 5,000 years to the land between two rivers, where humanity first learned to write, to build great cities, and to organise society in ways that would echo through all the millennia to come. In the quiet darkness of your rest, we will walk together through the streets of ancient Ur, past the towering ziggurats that reach toward the heavens, and meet the people who first called themselves civilized. The Sumerians, the first civilization. Let your breathing slow, let your muscles relax, and let us begin. The land between two rivers. Imagine, if you will, a landscape unlike any you have known. The year is approximately 3500 before the Common Era. The place is southern Mesopotamia, the land the ancient Greeks would later call the territory between the rivers. Two great waterways flow through this realm, the Tigris and the Euphrates, carrying life-giving water from distant mountains down to the Persian Gulf. The air here is thick and warm. In summer, temperatures soar to heights that would challenge even the hardiest modern traveller. But this heat, combined with the rich silt deposited by the annual floods, creates conditions perfect for agriculture on a scale never before seen by human eyes. The land is flat, stretching endlessly toward horizons blurred by heat and dust. There are no forests here, no stone quarries nearby, none of the natural resources that other ancient peoples would take for granted. Yet from this challenging environment, from this seemingly barren plain, the Sumerians built something extraordinary. They built civilization itself. The name Sumer comes from the Akkadian language, spoken by peoples who would later inhabit these same lands. The Sumerians called their land Ki-Engir, which scholars believe meant something like the land of civilized lords, or perhaps the land of the noble language. Even in their own terminology, we see a people conscious of their unique achievement, aware that they had created something unprecedented in human history. As you lie here in comfort, let your mind drift back to those ancient days. Picture the landscape slowly transforming under human hands. Where once there was only wild marsh and arid plain, canals begin to appear, cutting geometric patterns across the earth. Fields of barley wave golden in the sun. Date palms cluster near water sources, their sweet fruit ripening in the heat. And rising from the flat plains like mountains built by human ambition come the cities. The first cities breathe slowly now, and let us approach one of these ancient urban centres. Perhaps we visit Uruk, largest of the Sumerian cities, home at its peak to perhaps 50,000 souls. Or perhaps Ur, with its magnificent ziggurat, still partially standing to this day. Or Eridu, which the Sumerians themselves believed to be the first city ever created, a place where kingship descended from heaven. These are not mere villages or enlarged tribal settlements. These are true cities, with all that word implies. Massive walls surround them, thick enough that chariots could race along their tops. Within these walls, thousands upon thousands of people live in close proximity, in ways their ancestors could never have imagined. The streets are narrow, winding between mud brick houses that stand 2 or 3 stories tall. The wealthy live in spacious homes built around central courtyards, where fountains splash and gardens grow. The poor crowd into smaller dwellings, sharing walls with their neighbours, but even they participate in something larger than themselves, something that gives their lives structure and meaning. At the heart of each city stands the temple complex, dominated by the ziggurat, that distinctive stepped pyramid that serves as both religious centre and administrative hub. These structures rise in massive tiers, each level smaller than the one below, creating a mountain where no natural mountain exists. At the very top, in a small shrine accessible only to priests, the city's patron deity is believed to dwell. Imagine climbing the stairs of such a ziggurat on a quiet evening. Each step takes you higher above the city, above the noise and bustle of human life. The air grows clearer, the horizon expands. From the top you can see the entire city spread below you like a living map. See the surrounding fields stretching to the limits of irrigation. See other cities in the distance, their own ziggurats rising to meet the sky. Here, in these elevated holy places, the Sumerians believed heaven and earth touched. Here they brought their offerings, their prayers, their hopes for good harvests and healthy children and protection from enemies. Here the priests performed rituals that maintained cosmic order, that kept the gods satisfied and the world running as it should. Let this image settle in your mind as you drift towards sleep, the stepped pyramid rising against the sunset, the city below preparing for night, the eternal flow of the rivers in the distance, the gift of writing. But perhaps the Sumerians' greatest achievement, the one that truly marks them as the first civilization, came not from their architecture or their agriculture, or even their cities themselves. It came from a simple innovation, one so profound that it changed human consciousness itself. They learned to write. Consider what this means. For countless millennia, humans had communicated through speech, through gesture, through art painted on cave walls. Information could be passed from person to person, from generation to generation, but only through direct contact, through the living chain of memory and repetition. Knowledge was fragile, subject to the limitations of human recall, vulnerable to being lost or distorted with each retelling. Then, in Sumer, around the year 3200 before the Common Era, someone made a mark in wet clay, and that mark meant something. It stood for a word, an idea, a piece of information that could now exist independent of any human mind. It could be stored, it could be transported, it could speak across time and space to anyone who learned to read its meaning. The earliest Sumerian writing consisted of pictographs, simple pictures representing concrete objects. A circle with lines might represent the sun. A simplified drawing of a cow's head meant cattle. A triangular shape indicated a woman. These symbols were pressed into soft clay tablets using a reed stylus. Then the tablets were dried or baked hard, preserving the information essentially forever. Imagine being one of those first scribes, sitting cross-legged in a temple complex, a fresh clay tablet before you, and a reed stylus in your hand. Your task today is to record the temple's grain stores, to note how many bushels of barley have been received as tribute, how much has been distributed to workers, how much remains. Without writing, this would require impossible feats of memory. With writing, it becomes routine. You press your stylus into the clay, making neat rows of marks. Each mark is deliberate, precise. You're not merely recording numbers on clay. You're participating in something revolutionary. You're extending human memory beyond the limits of the human brain. As time passed, Sumerian writing evolved. The pictographs became more abstract, more stylized. The system expanded to include not just concrete objects but abstract concepts, grammatical particles, phonetic elements. By around 2600 before the Common Era, Sumerian cuneiform, named for the wedge-shaped marks made by the reed stylus, had become a fully functional writing system capable of expressing any thought that could be spoken. Let your breathing deepen as you consider the implications. With writing came history, for now events could be recorded for posterity. With writing came law, for rules could be codified and preserved. With writing came literature, for stories could be composed and refined and passed down unchanged to future generations. With writing came accounting, administration, science, philosophy. With writing came civilization as we know it. The organization of society. In the gentle darkness behind your closed eyes, let us now explore how Sumerian society organized itself. This was not a simple world. The Sumerians created social structures of remarkable complexity, hierarchies and specializations that allowed thousands of people to live and work together efficiently. At the top of Sumerian society stood the king, though in the earliest periods the temple priests wielded equal or greater power. The king was seen as the representative of the gods on earth, chosen to maintain order and justice, to lead the army in times of war, to oversee great, building projects in times of peace. Sumerian kings took their responsibilities seriously. They built and maintained the irrigation systems that kept the fields productive. They organized the defense of the city against raiders and rival states. They sponsored the construction of temples and palaces. They dispensed justice according to established law codes. Some were warriors, some were builders, some were wise administrators. All understood that their legitimacy depended on maintaining the favor of the gods and the prosperity of their people. Below the king came the priests and priestesses, those who mediated between the human and divine realms. These were not simple religious figures. They were administrators, scholars, astronomers, doctors. The temples they served were not just places of worship, but centers of learning and economic power. The temples owned vast tracts of land, employed thousands of workers, stored great quantities of grain and other goods. To be a high priest or priestess was to wield enormous influence over the life of the city. The priests maintained detailed records of everything. They tracked the movements of planets and stars, looking for omens and signs from the gods. They recorded economic transactions, ensuring that tribute was paid and workers received their rations. They preserved medical knowledge, collecting recipes for potions and treatments. They copied and maintained literary texts, the epic poems and mythological stories that defined Sumerian culture. Imagine spending your days in such a temple complex. The air is cool inside the thick mud brick walls, a relief from the brutal heat outside. You work in a scriptorium, a room dedicated to writing and record-keeping. Around you, other scribes sit cross-legged, their clay tablets before them, their reed styluses moving with practiced precision. The only sounds are the soft scratching of reed on clay, the occasional murmur of consultation, the distant chanting of priests performing rituals in the temple proper. You're copying a hymn to Inanna, goddess of love and war. The text is ancient, composed by a priestess who lived generations ago, but it must be preserved. Your careful work ensures that these words will survive, that future generations will know how to properly praise the goddess, that this piece of Sumerian culture will not be lost. Below the priests came the scribes themselves, those who had spent years learning the complex cuneiform script. Not everyone could read and write. Literacy was a specialized skill, one that required long training and considerable intelligence. Scribes were respected professionals, employed by the palace, the temples, wealthy merchants, anyone who needed records kept or letters written. They formed a distinct social class, neither rulers nor common workers, but essential to the functioning of civilized society. Then came the merchants and craftsmen, those who produced the goods and services that made city life possible. There were potters and weavers, metalworkers and jewelers, brewers and bakers, carpenters and leather workers. Each trade had its own techniques, its own secrets passed from master to apprentice. The best craftsmen could achieve remarkable levels of skill, creating objects of great beauty and sophistication. Sumerian artisans worked with whatever materials they could obtain. Clay was abundant, and they used it for everything from simple storage jars to elaborate statues and decorative panels. They imported copper and tin to make bronze, which they fashioned into tools, weapons, and ornaments. They traded for precious stones like lapis lazuli from distant Afghanistan, which they carved into cylinder seals and jewellery. They wove wool from their sheep into fine textiles, dyed with expensive pigments imported from far away. Let your mind wander through a Sumerian marketplace in the cool of the evening. Stalls line the street, each displaying its wares. Here is a potter, his shelves filled with vessels of every size and purpose. Here is a jeweller, tiny lapis lazuli beads arranged in intricate patterns before him. Here is a weaver, her fabrics dyed in reds and blues that catch the fading light. Here is a metal worker, bronze tools gleaming in his workshop. The air is full of voices, people bargaining, discussing, laughing. Children run between the stalls. Musicians play on a corner, their flutes and drums providing entertainment. The smell of fresh bread drifts from a nearby bakery. This is a living, vibrant city, a place where thousands of specialists work together, each contributing their skills to the greater whole. And at the bottom of Sumerian society were the workers and farmers, those who provided the labour that kept everything running. They dug and maintained the irrigation canals. They planted and harvested the crops. They hauled materials for building projects. They served as soldiers when war came. Their lives were hard, their work unending, but they too participated in the miracle of civilization. They too were part of something larger than themselves. Below even the free workers were slaves, prisoners of war or people sold into bondage for debt. Slavery in Sumer was not the chattel slavery of later periods, but it was still a harsh condition. Slaves had few rights and could be bought and sold. Yet even here, Sumerian law provided some protections. Slaves could own property, engage in business, even purchase their freedom under certain circumstances. As you drift deeper into rest, let this social complexity wash over you. Imagine being each of these people in turn, the priest studying the stars, the scribe copying ancient texts, the craftsman shaping bronze, the farmer guiding water through irrigation channels. Each had their role, each was necessary. Together they created civilization. The agriculture that sustained everything. But underlying all of this complexity, supporting the cities and the social hierarchies, and the specialization of labor was agriculture. Without the agricultural surplus that Sumerian farmers produced, none of the rest would have been possible. Let us explore how they achieved this fundamental accomplishment. The challenge facing the Sumerians was both simple and profound. The land between the rivers could be incredibly productive, but it required careful management. The rivers flooded annually, but not always at convenient times or to convenient degrees. Too much water could destroy crops and wash away settlements. Too little meant drought and famine. The soil was rich, but without irrigation much of it was too dry to farm. With too much irrigation, salt accumulated and poisoned the land. The Sumerians solved these problems through engineering on a massive scale. They dug canals to carry water from the rivers to distant fields. They built levees to control floods. They created reservoirs to store water for dry periods. They developed techniques for managing soil salinity, periodically leaving fields fallow and using crop rotation to maintain fertility. This was not work that individual families could accomplish on their own. It required coordinated effort by entire communities, organised and directed by central authorities. The temples and palaces provided this organisation. They decided where canals should be dug, how water should be distributed, which fields should be planted with which crops. They stored grain in times of plenty to redistribute in times of scarcity. They maintained the infrastructure that kept the whole system running. Imagine being a farmer in this system. The day begins before dawn, as it must when the sun becomes so brutal by mid-morning. You walk to your field, assigned to you by the temple that owns the land. The barley is nearly ready for harvest, the stalks heavy with grain, but first the field needs water. You make your way to the irrigation canal that feeds your section of land. Other farmers are already there, opening gates that allow water to flow into their fields. You wait your turn, as established by tradition and overseen by the water manager appointed by the temple. When your time comes, you open your gate and watch as water rushes into the small channels you have dug throughout your field. The water flows with a soft, constant sound, soaking into the thirsty soil. You walk along the channels, making sure the flow is even, that no area gets too much or too little. The sun rises higher, the heat builds, but the work must be done. Everything depends on it. Later, after the field is properly irrigated and the gates closed, you join other farmers for the harvest. Working together, you cut the barley with bronze sickles, gather it into sheaves, transport it to the threshing floor. There it will be beaten to separate grain from chaff, then winnowed in the wind. The grain will go to the temple granaries, and you will receive your ration in return, a portion set by custom and law. It is enough to feed your family, with a little left over that you might trade for other necessities. This is not subsistence farming in the traditional sense. You are not growing food just for yourself and your immediate family. You are part of a larger system, contributing to a collective surplus that supports scribes and priests, craftsmen and soldiers, all the people who do not grow their own food but whose work is nonetheless essential. The main crop was barley, hardy and well suited to the climate. The Sumerians also grew wheat, though it was more susceptible to the salinity problems that increasingly plagued their fields. They cultivated dates, which thrived in the heat, and provided both food and a sweetener for beer and other recipes. They grew onions and garlic, lentils and chickpeas, lettuce and cucumbers. They raised sheep for wool and meat, cattle for ploughing and leather, pigs for pork, goats for milk and cheese. Beer was particularly important in Sumerian culture. Made from fermented barley, it was a staple drink for all social classes. Workers received a portion of their wages in beer. Temples brewed beer for religious ceremonies. Taverns served beer to customers who gathered to socialize and conduct business. The goddess Ninkasi was patroness of beer, and hymns to her doubled as brewing instructions. Let the thought of abundant harvest fill your mind as you sink deeper into relaxation. Golden fields stretching to the horizon, granaries full of grain, gardens yielding vegetables and herbs, orchards heavy with dates, sheep in their pens, cattle in their byres, the fundamental prosperity that made everything else possible. The religious cosmos. The Sumerians lived in a world saturated with divine presence. Every aspect of their lives was shaped by their religious beliefs, their understanding of how the cosmos worked and their place within it. As you rest here, let us explore this religious worldview, rich with gods and goddesses, myths and rituals, temples and offerings. The The Sumerian pantheon was large and complex, with hundreds of deities arranged in a hierarchy that mirrored human society. At the top was Anu, god of heaven, though he was often distant from human affairs. More immediately important were Enlil, god of wind and storm, king of the gods and decider of fates. Enki, god of fresh water, wisdom and magic, the crafty one who often intervened to help humanity. And Ninhursag, the mother goddess, creator of humans and protector of childbirth. Below these high gods were countless other deities, each with their own domains and personalities. Inanna was goddess of love, beauty, sex and war, passionate and unpredictable. Utu was god of the sun and justice, who saw all things that happened in daylight and judged between right and wrong. Nanna was god of the moon, father of Inanna and Utu, wise and benevolent. Ereshkigal ruled the underworld, that dark realm to which all humans eventually descended. Each city had its patron deity who lived in the city's main temple. Uruk belonged to Inanna, Ur to Nanna, Eridu to Enki, Nippur to Enlil. These were not merely symbolic relationships. The Sumerians believed that the gods literally dwelt in their temples, inhabiting the statues placed in the innermost shrines. The city existed to serve its god, and in return the god protected and blessed the city. Imagine entering a Sumerian temple on a festival day. You join the crowd of worshippers making their way to the temple complex. The ziggurat looms above you, its mud brick walls painted in bright colours. Flags and banners flutter from the upper levels. The sound of music and chanting floats down from above. You pass through the outer gates into the temple courtyard. Here sacrificial animals are being prepared, sheep and goats that will be offered to the god. Priests in white linen robes move with practiced precision, performing rituals passed down through generations. Incense burns in braziers, its sweet smoke rising toward the heavens. Musicians play harps and lyres, drums and tambourines. Worshippers bring offerings, loaves of bread and jars of beer, dates and grain, whatever they can afford. You make your own small offering, placing it on the altar set aside for this purpose. Then you join others in prayer, addressing the god whose temple this is, asking for blessings, for health and prosperity, for protection from evil and misfortune. The prayers are formalized, passed down through tradition, but you speak them with sincere feeling. The gods are real. Their power manifest in the world around you. To ignore them would be foolish. To honour them properly is only wise. The Sumerian creation myth told of a time when gods walked the earth and did their own labour, digging canals and working fields. Tired of this toil, the gods created humans to serve them, to provide the food and drink and worship that the gods required. This was not seen as a burden, but as humanity's purpose, the reason for their existence. Humans existed to serve the gods, and in return, the gods maintained cosmic order and provided for human needs. But the relationship between gods and humans was not simple or always comfortable. The gods were powerful but not omnipotent, wise but not infallible. They had emotions like humans, could be angry or pleased, jealous or generous. They quarrelled among themselves, formed alliances and enmities, made decisions that affected the mortal world below. Humans could never fully predict what the gods might do, could only try to stay in their good graces through proper worship and ethical behaviour. The Great Flood story, later adapted into the biblical account of Noah, originated in Sumer. In the Sumerian version, the gods decide to destroy humanity with a great deluge, but Enki, who has affection for his human creations, secretly warns a righteous man named Ziusudra, instructing him to build a boat and save himself, his family, and representatives of all animal species. After the flood, the gods grant Ziusudra immortality and allow humanity to rebuild. As you breathe slowly and deeply, let these ancient stories wash over your consciousness. Stories of gods and heroes, of creation and destruction, of the eternal cycle of life and death. These stories explained the world to the Sumerians, gave meaning to their experiences, provided a framework for understanding both suffering and joy. The Sumerians believed in an afterlife, but it was not a place of reward or punishment. All humans, regardless of how they lived, descended after death to the underworld, a dark and gloomy realm where spirits existed as pale shadows of their former selves. The best one could hope for was to be remembered by the living, to have descendants who would provide offerings at one's grave. The worst fate was to be forgotten, to have no one perform the proper funeral rites, to wander the earth as a hungry ghost. Let the darkness behind your eyes become that ancient underworld, silent, still, peaceful in its way, a place where all earthly striving ends, where king and slave alike become mere shades, where the struggles and achievements of life fade into memory. Epic tales and literary traditions. The Sumerians were not just administrators and farmers, priests and soldiers. They were also poets and storytellers, creators of literature that would influence cultures for thousands of years to come. As you drift in the space between waking and sleep, let me share with you some of these ancient tales. The most famous Sumerian literary work is the Epic of Gilgamesh, though the version most people know today was written in Akkadian several centuries after Sumer's decline. But the story originated in Sumer, in a series of poems about Gilgamesh, the semi-legendary king of Uruk, who may have ruled around 2700 before the Common Era. Gilgamesh was said to be 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, a giant of a man, the strongest and bravest of heroes. But he was also arrogant and cruel, abusing his power and oppressing his people. The gods, hearing the complaints of Uruk's citizens, created Enkidu, a wild man who lived with the animals, to humble Gilgamesh. At first, Gilgamesh and Enkidu fought, two mighty warriors testing their strength against each other. But neither could defeat the other, and in this mutual respect they became the deepest of friends. Together they embarked on adventures, travelling to distant lands, fighting monsters, challenging even the gods themselves. Picture them setting out from Uruk on one such adventure. Gilgamesh is tall and powerful, his black beard carefully groomed, his muscles rippling beneath his royal robes. Enkidu is almost as tall but shaggy and wild-looking, more comfortable in the wilderness than in the city. They have decided to travel to the cedar forest, there to kill Humbaba, the terrible monster who guards the sacred trees. The journey is long and dangerous. They cross deserts and mountains, ford rivers, battle lesser monsters along the way. At night they make camp, and Gilgamesh has troubling dreams which Enkidu interprets. The dreams suggest the gods are watching their quest, that some approve while others are angered by their presumption. Finally they reach the cedar forest, dark and primeval, untouched by human hands. The trees tower above them, their trunks so thick it would take many men with joined hands to encircle them. The air is cool and damp, so different from the sun-baked plains of Sumer. And somewhere in the depths of the forest, Humbaba waits. The battle with Humbaba is fierce and terrible. The monster's breath is fire, his roar causes mountains to crumble. But Gilgamesh and Enkidu fight together, and their combined strength is too much even for this mighty guardian. Humbaba falls, and the heroes cut down the sacred cedars to bring back to Uruk. But this victory brings consequences. Enkidu offends the gods through his actions, and as punishment, he is struck down by illness. For 12 days he suffers, growing weaker and weaker, while Gilgamesh watches in helpless anguish. Then Enkidu dies, and for the first time, Gilgamesh truly understands mortality. Stricken with grief and terror at the thought of his own eventual death, Gilgamesh embarks on a quest for immortality. He searches for Utnapishtim, the Sumerian equivalent of Noah, the one human who survived the Great Flood and was granted eternal life by the gods. If Utnapishtim achieved immortality, perhaps Gilgamesh can as well. The quest takes Gilgamesh to the ends of the earth, through passages beneath mountains where no light penetrates, across the waters of death that surround the world. Finally he reaches Utnapishtim, who lives in paradise with his wife, far from mortal lands. But Utnapishtim's message is harsh. There is no path to immortality for ordinary humans, not even for heroes like Gilgamesh. Death comes to all. The best one can do is accept this truth and live well while life lasts. Build things that will endure. Leave a legacy. Find meaning in the time you have. Gilgamesh reluctantly accepts this wisdom. On his journey home, he loses even the plant of youth that Utnapishtim had given him, a last chance at extending his life if not making it eternal. But he returns to Uruk changed, wiser, ready to be the king his people need. The walls of Uruk will be his immortality, the city his legacy. He will be remembered not for living forever, but for living well. As this ancient story settles in your mind, feel its universal themes. The friendship between Gilgamesh and Enkidu, the grief of losing someone beloved, the fear of death, the search for meaning, the acceptance of mortality. The Sumerians understood these human experiences intimately, and they expressed them in poetry that still moves us across 5,000 years of separation. Other Sumerian literary works explored different themes. There were hymns to the gods, praising their power and beauty, recounting their deeds. There were laments, poems, mourning, the destruction of cities or the death of beloved rulers. There were proverbs and wisdom literature, collections of practical advice and philosophical observations. There were myths explaining natural phenomena or the origins of cultural practices. One particularly moving work is the Lament for Ur, composed after that great city was destroyed by invaders around 2000 before the Common Era. The poem describes in heartbreaking detail the city's fall, the slaughter of its people, the burning of its temples, the silence that falls where once there was vibrant life. The goddess Ningal weeps for her city, powerless to prevent its destruction, mourning the loss of everything she held dear. Let these ancient words echo in your drowsing mind. The pride of the Sumerians in their achievements, their awareness of how fragile those achievements were, their determination to record and preserve, to pass on their wisdom and stories to future generations. You, lying here in comfort thousands of years later, are part of that legacy. Through you, the Sumerians continue to speak. Science and mathematics. The Sumerians were not merely storytellers and builders of cities, they were also systematic observers of nature, inventors of mathematical and scientific concepts that we still use today. Let your mind wander now through the intellectual achievements of this ancient people. They developed mathematics out of practical necessity. When you need to calculate how much grain is in a storehouse, how many workers are needed for a project, how to divide land fairly, you need numbers. The Sumerians created a sophisticated number system based on 60, which gave us our 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle. Why base 60? It is an incredibly useful number for division. 60 can be evenly divided by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, 30. This made calculations much easier in an age without calculators. A merchant could quickly divide goods into equal portions. An engineer could precisely measure angles and distances. An accountant could balance complex sets of accounts. Imagine being a Sumerian mathematician, sitting in a quiet corner of the temple complex, a clay tablet before you. You're working on a geometry problem calculating the area of an irregular field so that taxes can be properly assessed. You have measurements of the field's sides, taken with measuring ropes marked at regular intervals. Now you must calculate the area. You work methodically, using formulas passed down from your teachers. The Sumerians knew how to calculate the areas of rectangles, triangles, and circles. They understood the Pythagorean theorem more than 1,000 years before Pythagoras. They could solve complex algebraic equations, though they did so without the algebraic notation we use today. Your stylus moves across the clay, recording numbers and cuneiform. The base 60 system requires memorizing many multiplication tables, but you learned these as a student and they come naturally now. You work out the calculation, check it twice, then write your final answer. The field is so many SR in area, the SR being a standard unit of measurement. The tax collectors can use this information to determine how much grain the field's owner owes. Mathematics was not pursued for its own sake in Sumer, but always for practical applications. Still, the level of sophistication reached was remarkable. Sumerian mathematical texts include complex problems dealing with compound interest, geometric progressions, and sophisticated accounting techniques. The Sumerians were also careful observers of the heavens. They tracked the movements of the sun, moon, planets, and stars, seeing in these celestial patterns both divine messages and practical information. When would the floods come? When should crops be planted? The sky provided clues. They identified constellations, dividing the night sky into recognizable patterns. They tracked the phases of the moon, using them to create a calendar. The Sumerian calendar was lunisolar, based on the cycles of the moon but adjusted periodically to stay aligned with the solar year and the seasons. Each month began with the new moon and lasted 29 or 30 days. 12 lunar months made up a year, with an extra month added every few years to prevent the calendar from drifting too far from the seasons. Picture a Sumerian astronomer priest standing atop a ziggurat on a clear night. The air is finally cool after the day's heat. Above you, the sky is vast and crystal clear, unmarred by modern light pollution. The stars shine with a brilliance hard to imagine today. The Milky Way stretches across the heavens like a river of light. You've been watching the planets, those wandering stars that move against the fixed background of the constellations. You know where they are supposed to be according to your records. You're checking to see if they have moved as predicted, or if something unusual is happening that might require interpretation. There, the planet you associate with the goddess Inanna has appeared in the eastern sky just before dawn. Brilliant and unmistakable. This is significant. You will note the exact position, the time of the appearance, the phase of the moon. Later you will consult the omen texts, lists compiled over generations that associate celestial events with earthly happenings. What does it mean when Inanna's star appears at dawn in this position? Is it a favourable sign or unfavourable? What should the king be advised? This was not science as we understand it today. The Sumerians did not separate natural explanations from supernatural ones, but their careful observations, their meticulous record-keeping, their attempts to find patterns and make predictions, these were the foundations on which later scientific traditions would build. They also practiced medicine, though again from within a worldview that mixed practical knowledge with religious belief. Illness was often seen as punishment from the gods, or the work of demons, but this did not prevent Sumerian physicians from trying various treatments. They used herbs and minerals, performed simple surgeries, set broken bones, delivered babies. Their medical texts describe symptoms and treatments for various ailments. A Sumerian physician examining a patient would first try to determine the cause of the illness. Had the patient offended a god, violated a taboo, been cursed by an enemy? Prayers, offerings and rituals might be prescribed alongside herbal remedies and practical treatments. Magic and medicine were not separate disciplines, but intertwined approaches to the same problem of healing. Let these intellectual achievements wash over your consciousness as you sink deeper into rest. The careful observations, the systematic record-keeping, the mathematical calculations, the astronomical predictions, the medical treatments, the Sumerians observing their world, trying to understand it, developing tools and concepts that would outlive their civilization by millennia. Trade and commerce. Sumer did not exist in isolation. Though their cities dominated southern Mesopotamia, the Sumerians were connected by trade networks to distant lands, importing what they lacked and exporting their surplus. As your breathing deepens and slows, let us follow these ancient trade routes. The Sumerians faced a fundamental problem. Their land was rich in agricultural products and skilled labour, but poor in many essential raw materials. There was no stone for building or sculpture, no wood for construction or shipbuilding, no metal ores for making bronze tools and weapons. All these things had to be imported, so Sumerian merchants organised expeditions to far-off places. They travelled up the Tigris and Euphrates to the highlands where forests grew and stone could be quarried. They crossed the desert to the west, reaching the Mediterranean coast and beyond. They sailed down the Persian Gulf to distant Dilmun and Magan, lands that we now know as Bahrain and Oman, and from there to the mysterious Meluha, probably the Indus Valley civilization in what is now Pakistan and India. Picture a merchant caravan preparing to depart from Ur. Dawn is just breaking. The air still cool, the city just beginning to wake. In a courtyard near the docks, donkeys are being loaded with goods for trade. There are fine textiles woven from Sumerian wool dyed in expensive colours. There are ceramic vessels of distinctive design, proof of Sumerian craftsmanship. There are measures of grain and dates, dried fish, manufactured goods of various kinds. The merchant overseeing this operation has done this many times before. He knows the routes, the dangers, the places to stop for water and rest. He has contacts in distant cities, fellow merchants who speak different languages, but understand the universal language of commerce. He has hired guards to protect the caravan from bandits. He has made offerings at the temple, asking the gods for safe passage and profitable trade. The caravan sets out following the Euphrates northward. The journey will take months. Along the way, they will pass other caravans going in the opposite direction, loaded with the materials Sumer needs so desperately. They will see other cities, some Sumerian, some foreign, each with its own character and customs. They will cross landscapes that change from river valley to dry plateau to distant mountains. Eventually they reach their destination, a city in Anatolia where timber is abundant and stone can be quarried. Here the merchant negotiates carefully. The textiles and ceramics he has brought are valuable, but not as valuable as the cedar beams and blocks of diorite he wishes to purchase. The bargaining goes on for days, each side trying to get the best deal possible. Finally an agreement is reached. Goods change hands. New partnerships are formed. Promises are made for future trade. The return journey is even slower, the heavily laden caravan moving at the pace of the slowest pack animal. But finally, after long months away, the merchant returns to Ur. The timber and stone are delivered to the temple that sponsored the expedition. The merchant receives his commission, enough to make him a wealthy man, and the temple has the materials it needs for its building projects, to construct new shrines and repair old ones, to create statues of the gods and commemorative monuments for the king. Maritime trade was equally important. Sumerian ships sailed the Persian Gulf, following the coast south and east. These were not the great ocean-going vessels of later civilizations, but substantial craft nonetheless, capable of carrying tons of cargo. They were built primarily of reeds, bound together in tight bundles and shaped into hull forms, though the larger ships incorporated imported timber for frames and planking. Imagine standing on the dock at Ur as one of these ships prepares to sail. The vessel sits low in the water, its hold full of cargo. The crew makes final preparations, checking ropes and sails, ensuring everything is secured. The captain, a grizzled veteran of many voyages, supervises with a practiced eye. The cargo for this voyage includes wool textiles, leather goods, and most importantly, grain. Grain is Sumer's greatest export, the product of their agricultural abundance. In the lands to the south and east, where fresh water is scarce and farming difficult, Sumerian grain is highly valued. In exchange, the ship will bring back copper from Magan, precious metals, exotic woods, and that most treasured substance, lapis lazuli from the mountains of distant Afghanistan. The crew casts off. The sail catches the wind. Slowly the ship moves away from the dock, out into the channel, toward the open waters of the Gulf. You watch until it disappears from sight, wondering what adventures await it, what wonders it will see, whether it will return safely with its valuable cargo. Trade brought more than just material goods to Sumer. It brought ideas, technologies, cultural influences from distant lands. A merchant who travelled to the Indus Valley might return with stories of their cities and customs. A craftsman might learn new techniques from a foreign colleague. A scribe might encounter different writing systems and incorporate useful elements into cuneiform. The cylinder seals, so characteristic of Mesopotamian culture, were essentially portable signatures for merchants and administrators. These small stone cylinders were carved with intricate designs in negative relief. When rolled across wet clay, they left a distinctive impression that served as a signature or seal of authenticity. No two cylinder seals were exactly alike, and their images often depicted complex mythological scenes. Imagine owning such a seal, commissioned from a master carver. The cylinder is small enough to fit in your palm, carved from a piece of lapis lazuli that came all the way from Afghanistan, its deep blue colour shot through with veins of gold. The scene carved into it shows you standing before a seated deity, making an offering. Your name is inscribed in cuneiform characters. This seal is uniquely yours, a symbol of your status and identity. You use it constantly. Every time you engage in a business transaction, you seal the clay tablet recording the deal with your cylinder seal, rolling it carefully to leave a perfect impression. Every time you send a letter, you seal the clay envelope that protects it. Every time you store goods in a warehouse, you seal the door with clay and your seal, ensuring no one can open it without breaking the seal and leaving evidence of tampering. Through trade, the Sumerian economic system grew increasingly sophisticated. Merchants operated on credit, interest was charged on loans, partnerships were formed for specific ventures, risk was distributed among multiple investors, contracts specified terms and conditions with remarkable precision. All of this was recorded in cuneiform on clay tablets, creating an archive of economic activity that historians still study today. Let the image of these ancient trade routes settle in your drowsing mind. Caravans crossing deserts, ships sailing distant seas, merchants from different cultures meeting and negotiating, goods flowing back and forth, ideas spreading across vast distances. The Sumerians were not isolated but connected, part of a wider world, contributing to and benefiting from an early form of globalization. Law and justice. The Sumerians believed deeply in justice, in the proper ordering of society according to established principles. They created law codes, administered justice through courts, and held even kings accountable to standards of righteous behaviour. As you drift between waking and dreams, let us explore this aspect of Sumerian civilization. The earliest known law code comes from Ur-Nammu, who ruled Ur around 2100 before the Common Era. His code, written in Sumerian cuneiform, established penalties for various offences, protected the rights of orphans and widows, regulated economic activity, and set standards for just behaviour. The code begins with a prologue in which Ur-Nammu describes his accomplishments. He has restored order after a time of chaos. He has made the roads safe for travellers. He has established honest weights and measures so that merchants cannot cheat their customers. He has ensured that the strong do not oppress the weak. All of this is presented as the king's sacred duty, the reason the gods chose him to rule. Then come the specific laws. If a man commits murder, he shall be killed. If a man commits robbery, he shall be killed. If a man kidnaps another person, he shall be killed. But for lesser offences, the penalties are fines, or compensation rather than death. If a man injures another in a fight, he must pay for the medical treatment and compensate the victim for their suffering. If a man divorces his wife without cause, he must pay her a sum of silver. Imagine being involved in a legal dispute in ancient Ur. Perhaps you're a merchant who believes another merchant has cheated you in a transaction. You bring your complaint before the court, which meets in a public space where anyone can observe the proceedings. The judges are respected elders, men known for their wisdom and integrity. They sit in a semicircle listening carefully as you present your case. You have brought the clay tablet recording the original transaction, sealed with both cylinder seals. You explain what you believe went wrong, how the other merchant failed to deliver goods as promised. The other merchant presents his defence. He claims the goods were delivered but were rejected by you unfairly. He too has documentation, tablets recording various stages of the transaction. Witnesses are called, people who saw the goods delivered or heard conversations between you and your opponent. The judges ask questions, seeking to understand exactly what happened. They are not interested in technicalities or clever arguments, but in discovering the truth and applying the law fairly. They consult among themselves, discussing the evidence and the relevant legal principles. Finally, they render their judgment. In this case, they find that the other merchant did indeed fail to deliver goods of the quality specified in the contract. He must return your payment and pay an additional sum as penalty for his breach of contract. The judgment is recorded on a clay tablet sealed by the judges. It is enforceable, and if the merchant does not comply, his property can be seized to satisfy the debt. This is justice as the Sumerians understood it. Not perfect, certainly biased in favour of the wealthy and powerful, but remarkably sophisticated for its time. The very idea that disputes should be settled according to established law rather than through violence or the arbitrary will of rulers was revolutionary. Women in Sumerian society had more rights than they would in many later civilizations. They could own property, engage in business, initiate divorce under certain circumstances. Some women achieved positions of considerable power, particularly as priestesses. The daughter of King Sargon of Akkad, who conquered Sumer around 2300 before the Common Era, served as High Priestess of the Moon God, and was also a renowned poet whose works survived for centuries. Still, Sumerian society was fundamentally patriarchal. Men held most positions of authority. Women's primary role was seen as bearing and raising children, managing households, supporting their husbands' activities. But within this framework, women could exercise considerable agency, especially widows and divorced women who controlled their own affairs. Slavery existed, as it did in all ancient societies, but Sumerian law imposed some limits. Slaves could not be killed or mutilated by their masters without cause. They could own property and engage in business on their own behalf. They could marry free people, and their children might be born free depending on circumstances. Freedom could be purchased or granted. While slavery was certainly oppressive, it was not the absolute chattel slavery that would emerge in later civilizations. The Sumerians understood that law alone was not enough to ensure justice. They also emphasized ethical behavior, moral principles that should guide one's actions even when no law specifically addressed a situation. Wisdom literature stressed the importance of honesty, compassion, humility, respect for the gods and for one's parents. The ideal person was one who lived justly, spoke truthfully, helped the weak, showed mercy to the suffering. Let these ancient principles of justice wash over you as you sink deeper into rest. The idea that law should apply to everyone, that disputes should be settled fairly according to established rules, that even kings are accountable for their actions, that society functions best when people treat each other with honesty and respect. These were revolutionary concepts 5,000 years ago, and they remain fundamental to civilized society today. War and conflict. The history of Sumer was not one of uninterrupted peace and prosperity. The cities frequently fought among themselves, competing for land, water rights, trade routes and dominance. Foreign peoples raided and sometimes conquered. Kings built armies and waged campaigns. As your consciousness drifts, let us explore this darker side of Sumerian civilization. The earliest Sumerian warfare was probably small-scale, raids between neighbouring cities over water rights or disputed territory. But as cities grew larger and more powerful, conflicts became more organised and destructive. Kings maintained standing armies, trained soldiers equipped with bronze weapons and armour. They built massive defensive walls around their cities, thick ramparts of mud brick that could withstand siege for months. The Sumerian army was built around infantry, soldiers fighting in tight formations with spears and axes. They carried large rectangular shields that could be locked together to create a shield wall. Behind this wall, soldiers with long spears could strike at enemies while remaining protected. It was an early form of the phalanx, that devastating military formation that would be perfected by later civilizations. Picture a Sumerian army marching to war. At its head rides the king in his war chariot, a heavy four-wheeled vehicle pulled by donkeys or onagers. The chariot is not the swift, maneuverable weapon that later civilizations would develop, but rather a slow, ponderous platform from which the king can survey the battlefield and shoot arrows. Behind the king come his elite troops, professional soldiers who train constantly and fight in the king's name. They wear copper helmets and carry bronze-tipped spears, bronze axes, bronze daggers. Bronze is expensive, requiring imported copper and tin, so only the best-equipped troops have bronze weapons. Others make do with weapons of stone or hardwood. Next come the levies, ordinary citizens called up for military service. They are farmers and craftsmen, not professional warriors, but they know that the defence of the city depends on them. They carry whatever weapons they can obtain, wear whatever protection they can afford. Their training is minimal, but their numbers are substantial. The army moves slowly, burdened with supplies, with siege equipment, with all the necessities of military campaign. Scouts range ahead, watching for ambush, seeking information about enemy positions. Priests accompany the army, performing rituals, consulting omens, ensuring the gods favour their cause. The enemy city comes into view, its walls rise high, seemingly impregnable. Guards watch from the towers, the gates are closed and barred. A siege begins. Sieges were brutal affairs. The attacking army surrounded the city, cutting off all access. No food could enter, no one could leave. Inside, supplies dwindled. People went hungry. Disease spread in the crowded conditions. The defenders hoped for relief, for an ally to arrive and break the siege, or for the attackers to run out of supplies themselves and withdraw. The attackers tried various methods to breach the walls. They built ramps of earth and rubble, trying to reach the top of the walls. They brought up siege towers, tall wooden structures from which soldiers could shoot down at the defenders. They tried to undermine the walls, digging tunnels beneath them, hoping they would collapse. They battered at the gates with heavy logs, trying to smash through. Inside the besieged city, imagine the growing desperation. Food rations are cut again and again. Children cry with hunger. The elderly and sick are dying. Water is strictly rationed. Every able-bodied person is pressed into defence, repairing, damage to the walls, repelling attacks, keeping watch through the long nights. The temple granaries are opened. The sacred stores meant for the gods now distributed to keep people alive. Even this is not enough. Hunger leads to desperation. Some talk of surrender, of opening the gates and hoping for mercy. Others vow to fight to the last, determined not to let their city fall. Finally, after months of siege, the wall is breached. A section undermined by the attackers collapses. Enemy soldiers pour through the gap. The defenders fight desperately, trying to close the breach, but the attackers keep coming. The battle moves into the streets, fierce house-to-house fighting. The outcome is no longer in doubt. When a Sumerian city fell to an enemy, the consequences were terrible. The victorious army looted freely, taking anything of value. The palace and temple treasuries were emptied. Men of fighting age were killed or enslaved. Women and children became spoils of war. Buildings were burned. The city that had stood for centuries, home to thousands of people, centre of culture and commerce, was reduced to ruins. But even in warfare, the Sumerians maintained certain standards. Treaties were negotiated and generally honoured. Ambassadors were considered sacred and not to be harmed. Defeated cities could sometimes negotiate terms, agreeing to pay tribute and acknowledge the victor's supremacy in exchange for being spared complete destruction. Captives were enslaved rather than massacred. As Sumer's history progressed, a pattern emerged. One city would gain dominance over others, establishing hegemony over much or all of Sumer. This dominance would last for a generation or several generations, until internal weakness or external invasion led to collapse and a new period of competition among cities. Eridu, Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Umma, each had their period of preeminence. Around 2300 before the Common Era, Sumer faced its greatest crisis yet. Sargon, king of Akkad, a Semitic people living north of Sumer, conquered the Sumerian cities one by one, creating the first true empire in history. The Akkadian Empire united Sumer and Akkad under a single ruler, established a standing professional army, created an efficient administration, and spread Mesopotamian civilization over a vast area. For a time, it seemed Sumer's independence was lost forever. The Akkadian language began to replace Sumerian in everyday use. Akkadian kings ruled from their capital in Akkad, reducing the Sumerian cities to provincial centres, but Sumerian culture proved resilient. The Akkadians adopted Sumerian cuneiform for their own language. They revered Sumerian literature and learning. They maintained the temples and continued the rituals. When the Akkadian Empire eventually collapsed around 2100 before the Common Era, destroyed by internal rebellion and invasion by mountain peoples called the Gutians, Sumer experienced a brief renaissance. The third dynasty of Ur reunified the Sumerian cities, rebuilt the great temples, restored order and prosperity. For a century, Sumerian civilization flourished once more, but this was Sumer's last period of independence. Around 2000 before the Common Era, the Amorites, another Semitic people, invaded Mesopotamia. Ur fell after a siege and was burned. The last Sumerian king was carried off into captivity. The Sumerian language gradually ceased to be spoken, surviving only as a scholarly and religious language like Latin in medieval Europe. Let these images of warfare and destruction flow through your drowsing consciousness, not to disturb your peace, but to complete the picture of Sumerian civilization. They were not perfect. They fought and suffered as all peoples do. But even in their conflicts we see elements of civilization, attempts to regulate violence, to establish rules, to preserve what could be preserved even in defeat. Daily life in a Sumerian city. Let us leave behind kings and armies, priests and scribes, and instead spend time with ordinary people. What was daily life like in a Sumerian city? As you rest here, breathing slowly, let me paint you a picture of a day in ancient Uruk. Dawn comes early in summer, the sun rising over the flat horizon, driving away the brief coolness of night. In a modest house in a residential quarter, a family stirs. The house is built of mud brick, like all buildings in Sumer. It is 2 stories tall, built around a small central courtyard that provides light and air. The family consists of a husband and wife, their 4 children, and the husband's elderly mother. The husband is a craftsman, a potter who operates a small workshop attached to the house. His wife manages the household, supervises the children, and helps with the pottery business. The eldest son, 14 years old, is learning his father's trade. The eldest daughter, 12, helps her mother. The younger children, a boy and a girl, are still mostly at play, though they have small tasks they must complete. The family rises with the sun. The wife and daughter prepare breakfast, a simple meal of barley porridge flavoured with onions, accompanied by dates and cups of beer. The beer is weak, more nutritious than intoxicating, safe to drink where water might be contaminated. Even children drink it, though in smaller portions. After breakfast, work begins. The husband goes to his workshop where a batch of pots is ready for the kiln. His son joins him, helping to arrange the pots carefully for firing. Meanwhile, the wife goes to market accompanied by her daughter. They need to purchase grain for next week's bread, some fish if the price is reasonable, perhaps some vegetables. The market is already bustling when they arrive. It is held in an open area near the main temple complex, where vendors spread their goods on the ground or on simple wooden tables. The air is full of voices, people haggling over prices, greeting friends, exchanging news and gossip. The wife is an experienced shopper, skilled at evaluating quality and negotiating prices. She examines grain carefully, checking for stones or insects mixed in with the kernels. She squeezes fish to check their freshness. She tastes a date before agreeing to purchase a basket of them. The merchants know her and respect her shrewd judgment. They banter back and forth, but eventually fair prices are agreed upon. While shopping, the wife hears news. There has been a dispute between two noble families over a marriage contract. The king is planning a new building project at the temple, which means work for many labourers. A merchant caravan has arrived from the north, bringing cedar wood and fine stone. Her neighbour's son has been accepted as a student at the scribal school, a great honour and opportunity. Purchase is made, mother and daughter return home, the girl carrying a heavy basket. There is much to do. Bread must be baked in the beehive-shaped oven in the courtyard. The house must be swept and cleaned. Clothes must be washed. The elderly grandmother needs help moving from her bed to a chair in the courtyard, where she can sit in the shade and watch the children play. The husband and son work steadily in the workshop. The kiln has been fired and the pots are baking. These are common household vessels, storage jars and cooking pots, bread moulds and drinking cups. Nothing fancy, but well made and functional. The husband takes pride in his work, though he knows these pots will likely be broken and discarded within a few years. Still, while they last, they serve their purpose, making people's lives a little easier. By midday, the heat has become oppressive. Work slows. The family gathers in the courtyard, which is shaded by a lean-to roof of woven reeds. They eat a light meal, more beer and dates, some cheese made from goat's milk. Then comes the afternoon rest period, when all but the most essential work ceases. The household drowses in the heat. Even the children are quiet, too hot to play energetically. Imagine yourself there in that courtyard, resting in the shade during the hottest part of the day. The mud brick walls hold a little of the night's coolness, making the house slightly more comfortable than the street outside. You can hear the city around you, the distant sounds of activity, occasional voices, the barking of dogs, the complaint of donkeys. But mostly there is silence, as everyone waits for the worst heat to pass. As afternoon wanes and the temperature drops slightly, activity resumes. The husband checks his kiln, which has cooled enough that he can remove the finished pots. His son helps him, carefully extracting each vessel and inspecting it for cracks or flaws. Most have survived firing successfully, which is gratifying. These will be sold in the market or traded for goods the family needs. The wife and daughter work on a weaving project, creating a wool cloth on a simple vertical loom. This is tedious work, requiring patience and skill, but the finished cloth will be valuable, either for the family's own use or to trade. The younger children help with simple tasks, fetching water from the neighbourhood well, feeding the chickens the family keeps in a small pen, grinding grain on a saddle quern. As evening approaches, the husband walks to a nearby tavern, a common practice for Sumerian men. Taverns are important social spaces, where men gather to drink beer, talk, conduct business, hear news. The tavern is run by a woman, as most are. Tavern keeping is one of the few businesses considered respectable for women to operate. The tavern is dim and cool, a welcome relief after the day's heat. The husband finds his friends already there, seated on benches along the walls, clay cups of beer in hand. They greet him warmly and make room. He orders beer and drinks gratefully, feeling the tensions of the day ease. The conversation ranges widely. They discuss business, sharing information about prices and opportunities. They talk about neighbourhood matters, the need to repair a section of street, concerns about a family that has fallen on hard times. They debate news from the palace, the king's latest proclamation, rumours of tensions with a neighbouring city. They tell jokes and stories, laugh and argue good-naturedly. This is community, Sumerian style. These men are not related by blood, but they are neighbours and colleagues, bound together by proximity and common interests. They help each other in times of need, celebrate together in times of joy, share the burdens and pleasures of life in the city. Eventually the husband returns home, pleasantly relaxed. Dinner is ready, a more substantial meal than breakfast or lunch. There is fish, caught in the Euphrates and grilled over charcoal. There is bread, dark and dense, made from barley flour. There are lentils cooked with onions and garlic. There are dates for sweetness, and of course, more beer. The family eats together in the courtyard, now blessedly cool after sunset. They talk about their day, share observations, make plans for tomorrow. The grandmother tells stories from her youth, tales the children have heard many times but never tire of. The oldest son mentioned something he learned today in the workshop, showing growing mastery of his craft. The daughter describes interesting things she saw at the market. After dinner, as darkness falls, the family prepares for sleep. There is no artificial lighting beyond small oil lamps that give barely enough light to see by. But they need no light. The routines are familiar. Beds are simple, woven reed mats laid on the floor or on raised platforms. Blankets are light, as nights are warm except in winter. Before sleeping, the family makes small offerings at the household shrine, a niche in the wall where a figurine of the family's protective deity stands. They offer a pinch of grain, a sip of beer, a brief prayer asking for protection through the night and blessings for tomorrow. Then silence falls over the household. One by one they drift to sleep. Outside, the city too settles into night. Guards walk the walls. Bakers begin preparing bread for tomorrow's market. Priests perform evening rituals in the temples. But most of Uruk sleeps. Thousands of people resting after the day's labours, gathering strength for tomorrow. Let this scene of ordinary life settle over you like a blanket. The rhythm of work and rest, the bonds of family and community, the small pleasures and simple satisfactions. The Sumerians were not so different from us. They loved their children, took pride in their work, enjoyed time with friends, worried about practical matters, hoped for better tomorrows. Their daily lives, stripped of grand events and historic significance, were simply human. The scribble school's education in Sumer was not universal. Most children learned their parents' trades informally, working alongside them from an early age. But for those destined for careers as scribes, a formal education was necessary. The scribal schools, called e-dubba or tablet houses, were where young people learned the complex cuneiform script and the vast body of knowledge a scribe needed to master. Let us visit one of these schools and spend a day learning as a Sumerian student learned. The school is attached to a temple complex, housed in a series of rooms built around a courtyard. Students arrive at dawn, boys aged 7 to 18, from families wealthy enough to afford the tuition and to spare their sons from labour. There are no girls in the school. Literacy for women is rare in Sumer, though not unknown. The master teacher, called the Umia, or expert, sits at the head of the main classroom. He's a stern figure, grey-bearded and serious, a man who has spent his entire life mastering and teaching the scribal arts. Around him sit his assistants, older students and junior teachers who help with instruction. The students sit on the floor, each with a fresh clay tablet before him and a reed stylus in his hand. The younger students, the beginners, will spend today practicing basic signs, making the same marks over and over until they become automatic. The wedge-shaped impressions must be precise, consistent, clear. This requires hours of tedious practice. Imagine being one of these beginners, your hand cramping from the unfamiliar position of holding the stylus, your back aching from sitting cross-legged for hours. You press the stylus into the clay, trying to make the wedge exactly like the example the teacher has shown you. But your hand slips, the wedge is crooked. You smooth the clay and try again, and again, and again. The teacher walks among the students, inspecting their work. When he finds good work, he nods approval, perhaps makes a brief comment of encouragement. When he finds poor work, his criticism is harsh. A student whose marks are consistently poor may be beaten with a rod, punishment the Sumerians believed necessary for learning. As you progress, in your studies over months and years, the curriculum expands. You learn not just how to form individual signs, but how to combine them into words and sentences. You copy texts, starting with simple word lists and gradually progressing to more complex literature. You memorize vast amounts of information, for a scribe must know many things. There are word lists to memorize, thousands of cuneiform signs and their meanings. There are mathematical tables, essential for calculations. There are legal formulas, standard phrases used in contracts and court documents. There are literary works, the great epics and hymns that define Sumerian culture. All of this must be learned by rote, copied repeatedly until it is engraved in memory. The more advanced students study specialized subjects. Some focus on accounting and administration, learning to manage complex economic records. Others study law, learning to draft contracts and legal documents. Still others focus on religious and literary texts, preparing to serve in temples or to become teachers themselves. The school day is long and demanding. There is a brief break for a midday meal, usually brought from home, but otherwise students work from dawn until late afternoon. Discipline is strict. Students must show respect to teachers, sit quietly, concentrate on their work. Failure to do so results in punishment. But there are also moments of satisfaction and pride, when you successfully copy a complex text without errors, when you solve a difficult mathematical problem, when the teacher praises your work, when you realise that you can now read texts that would have been incomprehensible just months ago. These moments make the long hours and harsh discipline worthwhile. Sumerian student exercises have survived, clay tablets bearing the clumsy efforts of beginners alongside the polished work of advanced students. Some tablets even contain teachers' corrections, showing where a student made errors. One surviving text, a composition called School Days, describes a student's daily routine, including being beaten by the teacher for various infractions, and then bringing the teacher home for dinner, after which the teacher becomes more kindly disposed toward him. This combination of strict discipline and personal relationships seems to have been typical. After many years of study, typically 10 to 15 years, a successful student emerges as a qualified scribe. He can read and write fluently in both Sumerian and Akkadian, the two main languages of Mesopotamia. He knows mathematics, law, literature, the proper forms for every kind of document. He is qualified to work in the palace, the temple, for wealthy merchants, anywhere that records must be kept and letters written. This education creates a distinct social class, the scribes, who form an essential part of the literate elite that runs Sumerian civilization. They are not as powerful as kings or priests, not as wealthy as successful merchants, but they are respected professionals, men whose skills are essential and whose services are always in demand. Let the image of that classroom settle in your mind as you drift deeper towards sleep. The rows of students, heads bent over their clay tablets, the scratch of reed styluses, the teacher's voice reciting texts to be memorized, the smell of fresh clay, the afternoon light slanting through the doorway, the transmission of knowledge from generation to generation, ensuring that civilization continues. The end of Sumer all civilizations eventually decline, and Sumer was no exception. As you rest here in comfort, let us trace the final chapters of this first civilization story, not with sadness, but with appreciation for all they achieved, and awareness of how their legacy continued. The beginning of the end came gradually. The third dynasty of Ur, which had reunified the Sumerian cities around 2100 before the Common Era, created a highly centralized bureaucratic state. The government controlled vast resources, employed thousands of workers, maintained detailed records of everything. This system was efficient but also rigid, dependent on the continued strength of the central authority. Around 2000, before the Common Era, pressure on Ur increased from multiple directions. Nomadic peoples pressed in from the surrounding deserts and mountains. The Amorites, Semitic pastoralists, infiltrated Mesopotamia in increasing numbers. Internal problems strained the system. Agricultural yields declined in some areas due to increasing soil salinity, a consequence of centuries of irrigation. Labour unrest troubled some cities. The provinces grew restive under heavy taxation. Then came invasion. The Elamites, peoples from the mountains to the east, attacked in force. Ur resisted but was overwhelmed. The city was besieged, captured and burned. The king was carried off to captivity. The systematic administration that had controlled so much of life collapsed. The lament for Ur, composed in the aftermath of this catastrophe, expresses the trauma of the city's destruction. The storm ordered by Enlil in hate, the storm which wears away the country, covered Ur like a cloth, enveloped it like a linen sheet. On that day did the storm leave the city. That city was a ruin. O Father Nana, that city into ruins was made. Picture the scene described in that lament. The once great city reduced to rubble. The ziggurats still standing but damaged, its bright paint blackened by fire. Houses collapsed, streets choked with debris, bodies unburied, left for scavengers. The few survivors wandering among the ruins, searching for loved ones, salvaging what they can, mourning all that is lost. The goddess Ningal, patron of Ur, weeps for her city. Despite her divinity, she was powerless to prevent its destruction. Even the gods could not save Ur from its fate. But this was not quite the end. Cities are resilient. Ur would be rebuilt, would flourish again in later periods under Babylonian and Assyrian rule. But it would never again be the capital of an independent Sumerian state. The third dynasty of Ur was the last native Sumerian dynasty. What followed was a period of political fragmentation. The Amorites established kingdoms throughout Mesopotamia. The most successful of these would be Babylon, which under Hammurabi around 1700 before the Common Era would unite much of Mesopotamia in a new empire. But this would be a Semitic empire, ruled by Akkadian-speaking kings, though one that preserved and honoured Sumerian culture. The Sumerian language gradually ceased to be spoken in everyday life, replaced by Akkadian. But it was not forgotten. It became a language of scholarship and religion, like Latin in medieval Europe or Sanskrit in India. Scribes continued to learn Sumerian. Literary texts continued to be copied and studied. Sumerian gods continued to be worshipped under their Akkadian names. Sumerian myths and traditions continued to influence Mesopotamian culture for millennia. In this sense, Sumer never truly died. Its civilization was absorbed and transformed by successor cultures. Its achievements became the foundation on which later civilizations built. Writing spread from Sumer to other regions, adapted to other languages. City life and urban organization, pioneered in Sumer, became the norm throughout the ancient world. Agricultural techniques developed in Sumer were adopted elsewhere. Mathematical and astronomical knowledge accumulated in Sumer was passed down and expanded upon. The Epic of Gilgamesh, originally Sumerian, was translated into Akkadian and became one of the most widely known literary works in the ancient world. Copies have been found from Egypt to Anatolia, from Persia to Syria. The story of the flood, told in the Gilgamesh epic, influenced Hebrew tradition and eventually became the biblical story of Noah's Ark. The Code of Hammurabi, though written in Akkadian, drew heavily on earlier Sumerian legal traditions. When archaeologists began excavating in Mesopotamia in the 19th century of our era, Sumer had been forgotten for over 2,000 years. The ancient Greeks and Romans knew nothing of it. The Bible mentioned Babylon and Assyria but not Sumer. The very existence of the Sumerian language was unknown until scholars deciphered cuneiform tablets and discovered texts in a language that was neither Semitic nor Indo-European. It was like discovering a lost continent of human history. Scholars realized that many things attributed to the Babylonians or Assyrians had actually originated with the Sumerians. The first cities, the first writing, the first law codes, the first schools, the first literature, so many firsts. Yet even as we celebrate these achievements, we should remember that the Sumerians did not think of themselves as pioneers or inventors. They believed their civilization had been given to them by the gods, that kingship and writing and all the arts of civilization had descended from heaven to earth in the beginning. They saw themselves as maintaining and passing on what had been entrusted to them, not as creating something new. This humility, this sense of being part of something larger than themselves, is part of their legacy too. The Sumerians understood that civilization is fragile, that it must be carefully maintained, that knowledge must be preserved and transmitted to future generations. They took this responsibility seriously, copying ancient texts, maintaining temple libraries, teaching students, recording everything. Because of their diligence, we can know them today. The clay tablets they wrote have survived where paper and parchment would have crumbled to dust. Their words speak to us across 5,000 years. We can read their letters, their contracts, their poems, their prayers. We can know their names, follow their disputes, understand their hopes and fears. Let this continuity wash over you as you sink deeper towards sleep. The long chain of human civilization, stretching from ancient Sumer to the present day. Each generation learning from those before, adding their own contributions, passing knowledge forward to those who come after. You are part of that chain. The Sumerians live on in you, in the alphabet you use, in the cities you inhabit, in the laws that govern your society, in the mathematics you employ, in the stories you tell. The gift of Sumer. As we near the end of our journey through ancient Sumer, let us reflect on what this first civilization gave to the world. What did the Sumerians contribute that still shapes our lives today? First, and most obviously, they gave us writing. The very words you are hearing now, transmitted through written language and recorded symbols, are descendants of that first cuneiform impression pressed into wet clay over 5,000 years ago. Without writing, there would be no history in the true sense, no literature, no accumulated body of knowledge spanning generations. Writing allowed human consciousness to extend beyond the limits of individual memory, to collaborate across time and space, to build on the achievements of the past. The Sumerians gave us cities, those complex human environments where thousands of people live in close proximity, specializing in different tasks, trading goods and services, creating culture and innovation at a pace impossible in smaller settlements. The urban lifestyle that most of humanity now embraces began in Sumer. The very word civilization comes from the Latin word for city. To be civilized is to be a city dweller, to participate in the complex social systems that cities make possible. They gave us organized government and administration, the bureaucratic systems that manage modern states, keeping records, collecting taxes, dispensing justice, maintaining infrastructure, all have their roots in Sumer. The clay tablets recording grain deliveries and worker rations from ancient Uruk are ancestors of modern databases and spreadsheets. The legal codes establishing rules and penalties are ancestors of modern law. The schools training scribes are ancestors of our educational systems. They gave us mathematics and science, our base 60 time system, our 360-degree circle, our astronomical observations and calculations, all build on Sumerian foundations. The mathematical tables used by Sumerian accountants pioneered the systematic organization of numerical knowledge. The astronomical records kept by Sumerian priests began the long process of understanding the cosmos. They gave us literature, the idea that language could be used not just for practical communication, but for art, for expressing profound truths about the human condition through stories and poetry. The Epic of Gilgamesh explores themes of friendship, mortality, the search for meaning, the acceptance of human limitations. These themes resonate as powerfully today as they did 5,000 years ago because they touch on fundamental aspects of human experience. They gave us architecture on a monumental scale. The ziggurat, that distinctive stepped pyramid reaching toward heaven, influenced temple and palace design throughout the ancient world. The idea that humans could build structures rivaling mountains, could reshape their environment on a massive scale, begins in Sumer. Every skyscraper and monument today echoes that Sumerian ambition to build something greater than themselves. They gave us agriculture as a systematic, organized enterprise. The irrigation systems, the crop rotation, the centralized storage and distribution of grain, the careful management of resources across large areas, all were Sumerian innovations. The agricultural surplus that freed people to pursue specialized crafts and intellectual work made civilization possible. They gave us the concept of law as something written, codified, applicable to everyone including rulers. The idea that justice should be predictable, based on established principles rather than arbitrary whim, that disputes should be settled according to rules, that even the powerful should be held accountable. These revolutionary concepts emerged in Sumer. They gave us the 7-day week, dividing time into regular cycles for work and rest. They gave us the sexagesimal system that we still use for measuring time and angles. They gave us the zodiac, those constellations through which the sun passes in its annual journey. They gave us many of the mythological archetypes that continue to appear in stories today. But perhaps most profoundly, the Sumerians gave us the idea of civilization itself. They demonstrated that humans could organize themselves into complex societies, could build great works, could accumulate and transmit knowledge, could create beauty and meaning through collective effort. They showed that humans were not merely clever animals, but beings capable of transforming their environment and themselves through culture and technology. Every civilization since has learned from their example, built on their foundations, sometimes knowingly, often unknowingly. The influence of Sumer spread through Babylon and Assyria to Persia and Greece, from Greece to Rome, from Rome to medieval Europe and the Islamic world, eventually reaching every corner of the globe. The torch of civilization first lit in Sumer has been passed from hand to hand across the millennia. As you rest here in the comfortable darkness, breathing slowly and deeply, let gratitude for this legacy fill your heart. You are the heir to 5,000 years of human achievement, stretching back to those first city builders between the rivers, their struggles and triumphs, their wisdom and knowledge, their art and literature, their innovations and inventions, all have contributed to making you who you are, and the world what it is. A final walk through Uruk. Let us take one last journey together before sleep fully claims you. Let us walk once more through the streets of Uruk at its height, around 2800 before the Common Era, when the city dominated all of Sumer and its king claimed dominion over the world. It is early morning, just after dawn. The air is still relatively cool, though you know the heat will soon become oppressive. The city is waking, people emerging from their houses to begin the day's work. The streets are narrow, winding between buildings of mud brick that lean slightly toward each other, nearly meeting overhead in places. You walk toward the city centre, toward the great temple complex dedicated to Inanna. Other people are moving in the same direction, some bringing offerings to the temple, others going about business in the administrative offices housed there, still others simply passing through on their way elsewhere. The streets widen as you approach the sacred precinct. Buildings become larger, more elaborate. You pass the houses of wealthy merchants and nobles, spacious structures decorated with painted friezes and glazed bricks. You pass workshops where craftsmen are already at work, the clang of hammers on bronze, the slap of potters' hands on clay, the rhythmic clack of looms. Then you enter the sacred precinct itself, passing through massive gates in the wall that separates the temple complex from the rest of the city. Before you rises the ziggurat, tier upon tier of mud brick painted in brilliant colours. A broad staircase ascends the front face, leading to the small temple at the very top where Inanna is believed to dwell. The courtyard at the base of the ziggurat bustles with activity. Priests in white linen robes move between buildings. Workers carry supplies, maintain the grounds, perform the countless tasks necessary to keep such a complex running. Scribes hurry with clay tablets under their arms. Musicians practice for the day's rituals. The smell of incense and baking bread drifts on the morning air. You pause to watch a group of worshippers making offerings. They have brought barley and dates, beer and bread, laying these gifts before an altar. A priest accepts the offerings, murmuring prayers, making the proper gestures. The worshippers bow low, touching their foreheads to the ground, then rise and step back. Their faces show a mixture of reverence, hope, perhaps anxiety. They have asked the goddess for something, a blessing, protection, help with some problem. Will she grant their request? You continue walking, circling the ziggurat, observing the various buildings that surround it. Here is the temple treasury, guarded carefully, where tribute and offerings are stored. Here is the administrative centre, where scribes keep records of temple lands and workers. Here is the school where young scribes learn their craft. Here is the brewery where beer for offerings is made. Here is the kitchen where bread for the gods is baked daily. Everything is organised, purposeful, part of a system refined over centuries. This is not chaos but order, not spontaneous but carefully planned and executed. This is civilization at work, hundreds of people coordinating their efforts toward common goals. You decide to climb the ziggurat to see the city from above as we did at the beginning of our journey. The stairs are steep, the sun already warm on your back. You climb slowly, pausing occasionally to rest and to admire the view. From the first level you can see the entire temple complex spread below you. From the second level you can see beyond the sacred precinct to the city itself, the dense maze of streets and buildings, the massive outer wall in the distance. From the third level you can see the surrounding countryside, the geometric patterns of irrigated fields, the dark line of the Euphrates, other cities visible as smudges on the horizon. At the top, in the small shrine where only priests usually venture, you stand in the presence of the divine. The statue of Inanna gazes out over her city, beautiful and terrible, goddess of both love and war. Offerings have been placed before her, the finest bread and beer, dates and grain, precious items of jewellery and clothing. Incense burns in golden braziers. The morning sun catches the statue's eyes, making them seem alive. For a moment, standing there atop the ziggurat with the city spread below and the vast sky above, You understand why the Sumerians built such structures. This is a place between earth and heaven, where the human and divine meet, where mortals can transcend their ordinary existence and touch something greater. This is architecture as theology, building as prayer. You descend slowly, carefully, your mind full of what you have seen. Back in the courtyard, life continues its normal rhythms. A merchant negotiates with a temple official. Children play near the outer gates, watched by their mothers. A funeral procession passes, mourners wailing their grief. A wedding party arrives at a nearby temple, the bride veiled, the groom proud, both nervous and excited about the life. They will build together. This is Uruk, this is Sumer. A place where humans learn to live together in large numbers, to organise complex societies, to create beauty and meaning, to build things that would outlast their individual lives. A place where writing was invented and literature created, where mathematics flourished and astronomy began, where law was codified and justice pursued, where the first civilization bloomed like a flower in the desert. Let this final image fill your consciousness as sleep approaches. The great city of Uruk, alive and vibrant, full of people pursuing their dreams and struggling with their challenges, creating and building and living and dying, generation after generation, adding their contributions to an ever-growing legacy. Into sleep and dreams. Your breathing has grown slow and regular. Your body has relaxed completely. Your mind drifts in that peaceful space between waking and sleep. The ancient world of Sumer surrounds you, not as distant history, but as living reality, as present as your own breath. You're walking now through a Sumerian garden in the cool of evening. Date palms rustle in a gentle breeze. A fountain splashes softly. The air is perfumed with flowers. Somewhere, someone is playing a lyre, sweet notes floating on the air. You find a bench and sit, looking up at the emerging stars. The same stars the Sumerians watched, the same moon that guided their calendar, the same planets they named for their gods. Above you, the cosmos unfolds in its eternal dance, beautiful and mysterious. You think of all the people who have sat in gardens like this across 5,000 years, watching the same stars, wondering about the same questions. Who are we? Why are we here? What meaning can we find in our brief time beneath these stars? The Sumerians asked these questions. You ask them still. Perhaps there are no final answers, but the asking itself is meaningful. The garden grows dimmer as night deepens. The stars grow brighter. Your eyes grow heavy. The sounds around you fade into peaceful silence. Somewhere in the distance, a priest is chanting evening prayers in the temple. The words are ancient, passed down through generations, syllables shaped by countless tongues before fading into silence, only to be renewed again with each recitation. The ziggurat rises against the darkening sky, solid and permanent, a mountain built by human hands and human dreams. It will stand for centuries yet, slowly eroding, finally crumbling, but living on in memory and in the structures it inspired. The rivers flow as they have always flowed, carrying water from distant mountains to the sea, bringing life to the desert, making civilization possible. The Tigris and Euphrates, eternal and ever-changing, constant in their inconstancy. You are drifting now, floating between past and present, between the ancient world and your own, between waking consciousness and the realm of dreams. The boundaries blur and dissolve. Time loses. Meaning. All moments are one moment. All places are one place. In your mind's eye you see the succession of civilizations that followed Sumer. Babylon with its hanging gardens and its great library. Assyria with its fierce warriors and magnificent palaces. Persia with its vast empire and its enlightened kings. Greece with its philosophers and playwrights. Rome with its laws and its roads, each building on what came before, each adding their unique contributions, each eventually fading, but never quite disappearing. The torch passes from hand to hand. The story continues. Civilization endures, and now you are part of that story, one more link in the great chain stretching from ancient Sumer to the present day, and on into the future. You carry within you the legacy of those first city builders, those first writers, those first mathematicians and astronomers and poets. Their blood does not flow in your veins, but their ideas live in your mind. Their achievements make your life possible. The darkness deepens. The stars wheel overhead. The garden fades into shadow. You're no longer quite sure if you're in ancient Sumer or in your own bed, in the past or the present, awake or dreaming. It doesn't matter. All is peace, all is rest. Sleep comes gently, naturally, like the night itself descending over the land. Your last conscious thoughts are of gratitude, for the comfort you enjoy, for the knowledge you possess, for the civilization that surrounds and supports you, for all the uncounted people across all the uncounted generations who built the world you inherited. Thank you, ancient Sumerians. Thank you for your gifts. Thank you for showing us what humans can achieve. Thank you for beginning the great journey of civilization that continues still. Rest now, dear listener. Rest in the knowledge that you are part of something vast and enduring. Rest in the peace of 5,000 years of human striving and achievement. Rest in the darkness that welcomed the Sumerians each night, as it welcomes you now. The rivers flow on, the stars wheel overhead. The earth turns in its eternal rhythm, and you, wrapped in comfort and peace, drift into deep and restful sleep. May your dreams be filled with ancient wonders. May you walk in Sumerian gardens and climb ziggurats reaching toward heaven. May you hear the splash of fountains and the song of lyres. May you know the peace of those who built well and lived fully, and left the world richer for their presence. Sleep well, sleepless survivor. Sleep deeply and peacefully. Let the story of Sumer carry you into restorative rest. The first civilization bids you good night.